when I was around 15, navigating my second year of secondary school. My academic schedule featured numerous instructional periods daily. Midday was designated for sustenance, and immediately following was my physics module. This particular class was situated in one of the two teaching spaces located in the building's lower level. My school was substantial, sprawling across 3 floors, yet this wasn't quite ample space for all the required lessons, prompting the establishment of a couple of rooms underground. It felt rather eerie in that section when no one else was present. Originally, it served as a supply and maintenance zone, but it had been renovated to better resemble a standard passage. The key distinction was the absence of any public address systems or speakers in the basement at that point. Consequently, no early morning periods that involved announcements were ever scheduled there. Everyone nicknamed this small subterranean area the subzone, and individuals often sought classes there primarily because it was cooled and the coursework was generally less demanding. Plus, it included its own private washroom. On that specific day, we had a brief test in physics. Typically, I'd finish among the first, finding the material relatively straightforward. After completing my test, I messaged a friend, Alex, who was in the other basement classroom, suggesting we meet in the washroom as I was feeling restless. He agreed. I exited the classroom and proceeded down the short corridor towards the restroom. Within moments, the door opened and Alex entered. We spent some time just chatting and joking until Alex checked his device and mentioned receiving a message indicating the facility was initiating a security alert. We exchanged glances, mirroring each other's knowing smiles. Neither of our teachers had observed us departing our respective rooms, meaning we had unrestricted movement within the building during the lockdown. We decided to stealthily ascend to the upper floor and explore the deserted corridors purely for the novelty. The most severe outcome we anticipated was having to explain that we hadn't heard any announcements due to our location in the basement rooms. Upon opening the entrance from the basement to the main level, we were taken aback to discover all the illumination had been extinguished, rendering the hallways nearly completely dark save for a faint light filtering in from the front entrance area. This seemed unusual as lights were typically left illuminated during security measures. Something serious was unfolding, and we suddenly felt uncertain about venturing around. Alex cautiously stepped further into the corridor, and I followed his lead. Alex then looked ahead and murmured, "Who's that?" I looked as well, and emerging from the gloom was an individual. Initially, we couldn't discern if it was an instructor or staff, but as he neared, we realized this person wasn't attired like any employee. He was dressed in ragged, street-worn clothing. "Okay, let's head back," I told Alex as we swiftly retreated towards the basement. He had surely seen us, whoever he was. We noticed both classroom doors were closed and lights were off, so to avoid causing a disruption, we opted to conceal ourselves in the restroom. I immediately switched off the light, and then we both took refuge in the corner cubicle. There was an absolute hush in the space. No ventilation hum, no heating system noise, nothing but our own controlled breathing and the infrequent sound of a liquid droplet from the faucet. The restroom door suddenly swung open and light from the passage briefly illuminated the room. The door then shut, plunging the restroom back into total darkness. Alex and I strained to silence our respiration. The room was so still that we could discern someone approaching our side of the restroom. The person paused and began inhaling and exhaling very heavily, as if they were winded. Both Alex and I were terrified. Alex then did something rather ill-conceived. He whispered near my ear, "We have to try crawling out through the other stalls." However, the room was so quiet that even Alex's hushed tone carried across the space. The heavy breathing outside the cubicle ceased, and the person attempted to push the cubicle door inward. That's when I whispered, "Move, move," to Alex. We both slid beneath the partition panel to the adjacent cubicle, then the next, and finally emerged on the far side of the restroom. The person was now aggressively pounding on the cubicle door we had just vacated. Alex and I scrambled up from the floor, yanked open the restroom door, and as light flooded the space again, we saw the individual from upstairs standing nearby. We hammered on the door to Alex's class. The instructor admitted us instantly. Alex hastily recounted the events as the teacher secured the door, mentioning seeing a metallic object protruding from the man's pocket. I was surprised by this, as I hadn't observed anything like that, but I didn't contradict him. Normally, a group of high school students would be finding such a dramatic entry hilarious, but I noticed all the young people huddled in the corner appeared genuinely apprehensive. An abrupt, loud impact on the door made everyone jump, and a couple of young women cried out in alarm. Alex, the teacher, and I could see the individual standing at the entrance, peering through the window pane while simultaneously attempting to turn the handle. After several forceful impacts on the door, seemingly in frustration, he turned and retreated down the corridor towards the stairwell. We're uncertain precisely how much longer the security situation lasted, but for over an hour, we remained in hushed silence in the room. The teacher occasionally posed questions to Alex and me in a noticeably worried tone, shaking his head after each detail we shared. Eventually, someone from the main level contacted the instructor, who then directed us all to proceed single file up the stairs and exit the structure, where we would be met by law enforcement officers. Alex and I did our utmost to provide a description of the individual to the police and the administrative head. One of the officers gave me a pat on the shoulder, and we were instructed to go home. Following this incident, the school implemented surveillance systems throughout the premises and significantly increased the budget allocated to safety measures. This occurrence was never reported in the press, so honestly, we never learned if the authorities apprehended the individual. I am convinced that person had a singular malevolent purpose: to cause us harm in that very restroom cubicle. As a former law enforcement officer, having served 2 decades in a state police force, the most unsettling communication I ever received pertained to a security measure underway at a nearby educational facility for adolescents. For privacy considerations, I will refrain from naming the specific institution. This incident occurred on a dreary, rain-swept afternoon. My unit call sign was broadcast over the dispatch network, directing me to respond to a lockdown situation where a questionable-looking individual had been observed disembarking from a light-colored vehicle parked behind the premises and entering through a rear door situated near the young male's changing rooms. I arrived at the service area lot of the building, pulling up right alongside the light-colored vehicle. It was unoccupied, and all points of entry and the storage compartment were secured. I opened the crimson service entrance that provided access to the corridor leading to the gymnasium located directly by the changing facilities. The primary lighting had been deactivated, plunging the entire interior of the building into dimness. I retrieved my tactical light from my duty belt and used its beam to navigate the passageways. I reached the main reception area where a staff member emerged from the administrative office, quietly instructing me to investigate the young male's changing room but to proceed cautiously, as the individual might be armed. I requested additional units over my communication device and was assured that assistance was already en route. I returned to the corridor I had initially entered from, where I located the young male's changing room right beside the external exit. I gently nudged the door open. There were no transparent panes in these spaces, leaving the room completely devoid of natural illumination, lit only by the beam of my tactical light. There was a low, constant hum present, originating from some sort of air circulation unit mounted overhead. But even over that, I was detecting faint scraping or subtle impacts on the cabinet doors emanating from the opposite end of the room. I was supposed to loudly announce my presence as an officer, but frankly, I was just too apprehensive. The palpable tension in the space was extreme. I held my tactical light in one hand and my sidearm in the other as I cautiously advanced towards the far side of the changing room. It seemed that regardless of my position within the space, the impacts and thuds were always coming from the opposite direction. I was positioned in the corner of the changing room near the entrance to the small lavatory, when the sound of someone forcefully slamming a cabinet door in another section caused me to startle violently. I moved in the direction of the sound and discovered it originated from the team's athletic changing area. There was no partitioning door separating the main changing room from the sports team section. The storage units in this part were notably larger as well. I finally summoned the courage to announce my presence by shouting, "Police!" Following my announcement, a young person began yelling for aid from somewhere within the room. It was quite indistinct, however. The young person banged on a cabinet door at the far end of the row I was in, and I realized the boy was trapped inside a locker. A wave of nausea washed over me. I told him I would return momentarily and once again requested backup over my communication device while rushing outside to where the light-colored vehicle had been parked. It was gone. My most significant error was not immediately obtaining the license tag number. I instructed dispatch to issue an alert for a suspicious light-colored vehicle. I hurried back into the building and directed the administrative staff in the main office to conclude the academic day and dispatch someone with an access tool for the changing room to free the young person from the cabinet. The boy had been held by the individual with a sharp implement pressed against his back. As I later presumed, the man was attempting to subtly guide the roughly 12-year-old towards his vehicle. The young person had sustained a laceration on his limb from the individual injuring him during his struggle. The man's vehicle was located approximately 7 days afterward in the parking area of a local convenience store chain, where he was apprehended following positive identification. I was staying at a certain motel chain in a neighboring state while exploring a specific college campus, an institution I was considering attending. My family was unable to accompany me, so I was traveling independently. After participating in campus visits, I stopped to grab some sustenance at a local eatery before returning to the lodging around 20-odd hours, intending to revisit the campus the following day. Roughly 60 minutes after my return to the room, an unusual alert system activated, accompanied by an intense pale illumination pulsing from an overhead angle. An automated announcement began repeating shortly thereafter, stating something akin to, "All motel patrons, please remain inside your accommodations. This is a security measure." I had never heard of a lockdown in a lodging facility. I wasn't even aware such places possessed these types of alert systems. I found it more intriguing and novel than concerning. Eventually, the sound of the alert ceased, but the illumination continued pulsing, and approximately every 30 seconds the announcement would rebroadcast. It was only around 21:30, so I activated the television for ambient sound while I began preparing for the night, changing clothes and attending to hygiene. I switched off the room lights when finished and settled into bed. I viewed television for about 30 minutes before deactivating it. The light was still pulsing, annoyingly intense and pale, which would certainly impede my ability to rest. I was starting to contemplate contacting the reception desk to inquire about the situation when the telephone unit rang. It was someone from the front desk. I was anticipating them to provide information about the alert and its duration. But instead, the individual on the line spoke with evident worry. She instructed me to stay composed and exit the room. I seized that opportunity to ask her the precise nature of the events unfolding. She proceeded to inform me that someone else was present in the accommodation with me and urged me to evacuate without delay. I dropped the telephone unit and instinctively began scanning my surroundings. A segment of my mind was intrigued to ascertain if another person was indeed present. I checked beneath the sleeping platform, examined the unoccupied lavatory, no one in either location. Then I observed the wardrobe portal situated adjacent to the lavatory. It was one of those wardrobes featuring a timber panel that glides. It was ajar by a narrow gap, and via that slender aperture I discerned an individual's visage. Initially, the realization didn't register, but upon the panel sliding closed, that moment prompted panic and I fled the room. The reception staff later displayed surveillance recording from approximately 60 minutes prior, showing a suspicious individual pacing the corridors, seemingly searching for a specific accommodation. When he reached my entrance, he accessed it using a key card he had somehow obtained, and that was the critical moment. I remained present as law enforcement escorted the individual out in restraints. Predictably, it was a male, of modest height, likely in his 40s. He glanced in my direction as he was led by, as if he recognized me instantly. It's unsettling in retrospect to consider that he could have been observing me for over 60 minutes from within that wardrobe space.